Hello, I'm Dr. Joe Arminio, and this is my channel, America Resurgent. In this short video, I'm going to make a big claim that America's coercion of Iran and its domination of global oil as a whole may result in a public debt default in 2026. America has been maintaining by any means, and now more and more recently by the use of force, what is called the petrodollar system. This doesn't get a lot of talk in the main press. It should, but it doesn't. And this is the heart, this petrodollar system is at the heart of America's financial advantage, and especially the advantage of its financial elite. To make the claim that I want to make, I'm going to draw upon three bits of information. So the first bit of information, I'm going to give you some sense of what is this petrodollar system. What is at the center of American economic strength? And secondly, I'm going to bring in some crucial documents that lay out a neocon strategy, which I believe has been in play right up until now, which the Trump administration continues. This goes back some 30 years. And the third bit of evidence is a very important chart dealing with something rather terrifying, which is the staggering size of the U.S. debt, in particular U.S. Treasury bonds that are maturing in 1 year or less. So let's get started. So first, to give you some bigger sense of things. So in 1944, America is emerging as the dominant power around the world, and it is the architect of what becomes known as the Bretton Woods International Trade System. Well, America, just to keep this short, America by 1971 was abusing this system. And so President Nixon took a rather bold step, and he no longer would exchange a dollar for gold with foreign governments. Now he allowed the dollar to so-called to float. Well, we were in a terrible way until we came upon the petrodollar system. So this is a system set up in 1974. So Nixon's still in office, and Henry Kissinger helps him negotiate this with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia then and now is the major oil-producing country on earth. And so the deal goes like this. The Saudis will sell their oil, which is the lifeblood of the world economy, in dollars exclusively or nearly exclusively. And here is an important other piece of this. They will then recycle their U.S. dollar profits into U.S. investments. In particular, they will buy treasury bonds. Why is that important? Remember now, as of 1971, we're not backing the dollar with gold. What's backstopping it? Treasury bonds and nothing else. These are IOUs. Now, America's also going to provide military protection to Saudi Arabia. Well, this arrangement between the Nixon administration and the Saudi kingdom eventually is extended, very shortly is extended to other oil-producing countries, Iraq, Iran, and so on, the OPEC, the so-called OPEC countries. And things go along in a certain way, in a way that seems to benefit America, certainly, and it benefits the OPEC countries until about 20 years into this process, OPEC's beginning to realize that they're getting the short end of the stick. They're providing us this valuable commodity oil and giving it to the rest of the world. And what are they getting for it? More and more dollars. That is to say, an inflated dollar. We just print dollars. They have to give us oil. So by the mid-90s, it's dawning on us that, dawning on the Saudis and dawning on the OPEC countries, that this is not a good deal for them. So what happens? Well, American strategists, in particular the neocons, in the mid-90s begin to say, well, we're going to have to maintain the petrodollar system by any means necessary. If we can't uphold this as a good commercial bargain, we'll uphold it by force of arms. We'll force OPEC countries to stay inside the dollar block. And so they then enunciate what becomes the policy of George W. Bush, who comes in office, remember, in 2001. And this is essentially American policy right down to today, to what the Trump administration is doing. Why are we pressing Iran? Oh, they say because Iran wants to acquire nuclear weapons, enormous ballistic missile arsenal. That's secondary. What's really going on is Iran wants to leave the petrodollar system. It wants to join a new system called BRICS, a new BRICS payment system. BRICS standing for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And BRICS is developing their own currency to rival the dollar. And they want to be selling oil in their their country's currency and the BRICS countries' currencies, and then eventually cycle their profits into their economies. And that would starve our economy. And because our debt is so large and for other reasons, we would collapse. So we don't want that to happen. And that's why we've been intervening against any and all oil-producing countries, including Venezuela and now Iran. That's really what's going on.
So this is the second exhibit that I've talked about. These are 3 neocon documents which call in effect for endless wars. Foundation for what we've been doing in the Middle East and other places for a very long time. So the first document, A Clean Break, comes up in 1996. The authors Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith are neocons. They are going to be instrumental in the George W. Bush administration, which will begin 5 years later, 2001. They're writing this document for the incoming Netanyahu regime in Iran. And they're advising Netanyahu, the new Israeli prime minister of 1996, that there should be a clean break, that they should move away from the Oslo peace process, get away from peace, wage war. In particular, or relevant to this discussion, apply a pressure on Iran. Why is that important? Well, since 1979, Iran has not been friendly to the United States. It's an oil-producing country. Iran and other countries in OPEC are grumbling about this petrodollar system. They want to move away from it. We can hear that very clearly from what they're thinking, from what they're saying. And so we'd like to have our client state, Israel, closest to the scene of action, apply some pressure on Iran. Ostensibly to help Israel vis-a-vis Syria. Iran is helping Syria, but the real motive, the deeper motive, keep Iran in the petrodollar system. So this is something that we'll see more and more. People talk about Netanyahu as being an independent actor. Well, maybe he's more of an attack dog for the United States. His principal role is to help maintain the petrodollar system. Now, the second document, which comes out in September 2000, there you see it's called Rebuilding America's Defenses. And this document is put out by the Project for a New American Century. I have here an excerpt from the second document. Well, the essence of this is they're talking about, yes, we need to put pressure on Iraq, but more importantly, they're saying, you can see it here, maintain a substantial American military presence in the Persian Gulf. That is to stop the rise of a great power rival. I'm pointing to it here now. What do they mean by a great power rival? Another petrodollar currency system. They could compete with a petrodollar system or even replace the petrodollar system. We have to stop that at all costs, and that this should be American grand strategy far out into the future. And these people who write this thing, who are part of the Project for a New American Century, will become instrumental in the incoming George W. Bush administration of a year later. Now notice these two documents are being promoted. This is before the attack of September 11, 2001, before all the concern about Saddam Hussein, and especially about weapons of mass destruction, about Al-Qaeda, way before then. What is the real motive here? Maintain the petrodollar system. And then the third document, the National Security Strategy, September 2002, put up by the White House. Same people who wrote the first and second documents, especially the second document. These are neocons who, and you'll see in their document, National Security Strategy, there is many references to the word preemption, to preemptive attack, to preemptive war, to stopping, and here I have an actual excerpt from that report. Be prepared to stop rogue states from threatening or using weapons of mass destruction. Hit them before they can hit us. And they, in particular, reference Iraq as wanting to acquire weapons of mass destruction. This is a pretext, a justification for maintaining a strong American military presence in the Persian Gulf region. To why? To maintain the petrodollar system at all costs, including by force if necessary, intimidate OPEC to stay inside the petrodollar system. And I suggest that this is at the basis of Trump's behavior vis-a-vis Venezuela and Iran. Neocon strategy has continued now, upwards of 30 years. The third exhibit I want to bring to your attention is this chart. U.S. government interest-bearing debt maturing in 1 year or less as percentage of GDP. What is interest-bearing debt in this case? These are treasury bonds. Remember, the dollar is only backed by treasury bonds. These are IOUs. Before I get into the detail here, I want to drop a very staggering number on you. $10 trillion of treasury bonds are maturing in 1 year or less. The U.S. federal government needs to find buyers who will pick up $10 trillion of these bonds, or we go into default and they're immediately thereafter into depression. We have to find buyers. We have to also finance these bonds. $10 trillion amounts to 31% of the U.S. GDP. So let's now look in closer detail at the chart. So along the horizontal axis, I have years. So there you have 2000 here. I'm pointing to it, coming all the way over now to 2026, the present year. The vertical axis is treasury bonds maturing in 1 year as a percentage of nominal GDP. So I mentioned before here, we have $10 trillion of treasury bonds coming due. That represents 31%. You can see where I'm pointing, about 31% of our GDP. It's a huge number. Now compare that number to where it was back in the early 2000s. It's about 10% of GDP. That is interest-bearing debt, treasury bonds, that is, coming due, amounted to about 10% of GDP. It was terrible. It was about $1 trillion, but we could handle it. You see the global financial crisis. Now the need to hold these, roll over these treasury bonds is increasing. It's now up to in the low 20% of GDP. But then we have this horror here in 2020. Very bad year it was. At that point, interest-bearing debt maturing in 1 year or less, that is treasury bonds coming due in 1 year or less, was now 38% of GDP. The world looked at us and said, "You're not up to it, Uncle Sam. You can't pull this off." And foreign holdings of treasury bonds were cut dramatically. Foreign holders of treasury bonds dumped their treasury bonds. They dumped, as it turns out, about $500 billion of treasury bonds, which was enough to trigger what I'm now pointing to, this horror, this bond market crisis, 2022-2023. So you can see that the Federal Reserve System repaired the damage. The crisis was brought to an end, and yet the treasury bonds coming due as a share of GDP is inching up, now back up to 31%. It's inching back up to that 38%. Based on this historical chart, you can see that we have very little margin of error left, very, very little indeed. You can see that over time, the treasury bond numbers keep going up, and as a share of GDP, they keep going up. We're out of time. If we go to war, we go to war in Venezuela, in Iran, and what have you, if there is another major economic calamity, we'll have another bond market crisis. This could be the end. This could be the final one before we plunge into depression. So the president is coercing Iran, trying to force it to stay inside the petrodollar system. He has a very limited window of opportunity. It's a bad idea. This petrodollar system is getting us into more and more debt. This neocon strategy of maintaining it by force is nothing in the end but an enormous distraction, taking us off the ball, which is our domestic problems, which is our debt problem. The president's been offering an alternative to maintaining the petrodollar system by force. I should say he's offering a way to complement that system. He's suggesting that we turn toward cryptocurrency, in particular to stablecoin. That's a longer discussion. It would deal with it would stave off a debt default in the short term, yes, but in the long term, it's a very bad solution. Why? Because stablecoin is digital money. They're digitizing our finances. The financial elite would just love to be able to control and digitize all our money so they could then tell us what we could buy and sell. What the president needs to do is find a wholesome solution to this debt crisis. Maintaining the petrodollar system by force is not a solution. You can see we're coming to the end of it. Stablecoin is not a solution. He needs to find a third way out, and there is one, I would suggest. That is a longer discussion, but there's no talk about it. Instead, he's going down the well-trod neocon path, which is a path to oblivion, and now this novel approach using novel technologies, which in the end is also a path to oblivion. We need to do something truly responsible, truly solving the debt crisis.
This concludes what I have to say about the petrodollar system, the neocon strategy to maintain it by force, and this miserable dead end of a complement to the system, stablecoin. Please like this video, share it, comment on this video. I promise to respond to all the comments that you leave. Time is short. Let us work together There is a way to solve the debt crisis. I will address this other way in future videos. But what we have before us, care of the Trump administration and Congress, are not the ways to do it.